everybody. Welcome to Project Management Paradise. Today we are speaking with Penelope Bellegarde. Penelope is founder of The Data Touch, a digital analytics consultancy and training business. Penelope is passionate about delivering business value with data, and we're going to talk a lot today about managing digital information and how we can use it best in our organizations. Penelope, you're very welcome, and thank you for talking with us today on Project Management Paradise.
Hi, Kat. Thank you. Delighted to be here.
Excellent. Penelope, you're a long time in the business world where we're all drowning in data, and there's so much out there on the internet highway. Tell us a little bit about digital analytics. It's a big buzzword now, and how we measure digital assets and how we can make them work for our organizations.
Absolutely. So the field of digital analytics broadly consists of analyzing consumer behavior across digital platforms, whether that is websites, social media platforms, but also assessing the effectiveness of digital marketing campaigns. And by the way, this is something that applies across sectors. So, I've been involved over the years working with media companies, travel, e-commerce, professional services, banking, including the public sector as well. So, it is not just about making more money online. It is also about how can we use digital to save costs? And in the case of the public sector, for example, it is about, can digital help us reduce cost to serve, for example? So it's got very broad applications, which is why it's a very fascinating industry.
Some of those organizations are absolutely massive, particularly those in the public sector, Penelope. And even with one organization, they may have many different departments,
Yes.
both internal and external, and their customers are different. How can we help those organizations, particularly the public service ones, to use the information that's available to us to better support the customers and delivery really of, I suppose, of their remit, their governmental remit?
Sure. One thing that's really, really important is really understanding what it is that we want to achieve with the data. And why do I say that? Well, in the digital world, sometimes I say that we have far too much data. We have a lot of data that is being collected because it technically can be, not because it should. And one of the drawbacks of this is that we end up, organizations, especially large ones, public and private, by the way, end up with tons and tons of data that they're not sure what to do. They're not sure how to leverage it properly. And they're also not sure about what data actually really matters. And so one of the things that I spend a lot of time helping clients with is identifying the data that really matters for the objective that they want to achieve. And we do that through the identification of KPIs, key performance indicators. And this is a very useful exercise because, we go from 200 different data metrics to 5 or 10 maximum. And these are the beginning of the answers to the questions that we need to solve for organizations.
Okay, so KPIs, I guess the word or the acronym itself has kind of become a little old-fashioned, but not really the whittling down of that data to deliver us those few items that we need to concentrate on in order to get maximum output from our users or for our users. I know that's a huge science in itself, and you spend a lot of time with organizations. Can you give us maybe the top 3 most popular KPIs without going into the science of it too much? but maybe give us the top 3 KPIs that you find organizations will focus on.
It's an interesting question because I get that question a lot, but it's very specific to organizations because it's very specific to what they want to achieve. And even if even if we talk to two different companies in the same market, let's say two different banks, for example, or two different fashion companies, they may well have very different KPIs because the objectives that they've set themselves are very different. The customers that they serve may be very different. And so even though it can be tempting to rely on, the top 3 or the top 10 KPIs, I would say sometimes it's a little bit dangerous because, KPIs are so specific to one organization and its strategy, that before we get to the identification of KPIs, there's actually a lot of work that needs to be done, which in many cases isn't done. And this is why many organizations end up with data noise as opposed to data insights. Mm-hmm. So, and of course, for example, in the e-commerce world and banking world, which are two sectors that I have been involved in over the years, there are KPIs that do tend to come back, but I want to be careful here because I think that looking at mainstream KPIs is sometimes part of the problem for organizations. So yes, but I appreciate that this is it's the $1 million question, which sometimes cannot be answered without actually really bringing key stakeholders in each organization and then defining the key questions that need to answer. What's the value that we want to bring? And then let's review all of the data that we've got and select the data that matters.
Exactly. So just be wary, everybody. One size does not fit all.
Exactly that.
Very good. And with that as well, or I guess following on from that, Penelope too, is kind of in line with data literacy, and you speak a little about this, or you speak a lot about this, really, I should say, is where you're empowering as many people with data is something that you're passionate about. Yes. Tell us a bit about the difference between consuming data, so all of that data, digital data and otherwise that's available to us, and using insight to benefit people and their organizations in our regular working day, because we are bombarded.
That's true. Absolutely. And yes, so education around data is something that I'm hugely passionate about. I find it really rewarding when I can help demystify the whole data piece to organizations that really need it. And the other thing is, data isn't just for the techies anymore. It may have been the case 10 years ago, but now everyone is expected to not only consume data, but to actually be in a position to act upon it. And it's really important to be able to give some simple techniques and methodologies to anyone in the organization so that they feel comfortable acting upon that data. And this is something that I try and do as much as possible. So I spend a lot of time designing data programs which are as practical as possible, really making sure that by the end of the training, individuals are actually able to start really using it day to day with confidence, because yes. I think there is a lot of many people are still very scared of data. They're not really sure how to tackle the whole piece, when actually it doesn't have to be that scary. If you follow the right methodology, it can be accessible to everybody. And I think that's really important.
Very good. Can you give us your number one tip? Or do we have to get the book?
My number one tip, and something that I really insist on during training programs, is we've got to start with asking ourselves what it is that we want to solve, what it is that we want to ask. So the spending time on really identifying a very good business question is absolutely critical.
Okay.
And the reason for this is it does a number of things. First of all, it actually is telling us, where are we going? Where do we need to be by the end of this exercise? Well, we need to have answered this question. We can't afford to just look at data because it's interesting. We don't have time. And it just gives that focus, and it creates a route, if you like, in that huge data ocean. It gives us focus from the very start. And the clearer we are on the business question we want to answer, the quicker we'll get to the solution.
Yes, yeah. And these in turn line up with your KPIs, which in turn line up with their strategic objectives, which in turn line up with hopefully a profitable path and that clear path for the journey of the organization itself.
Absolutely, absolutely, yes.
So you are so passionate about training and getting the message across to people in such a way that we can just kind of get a big machete and trash through all of this data.
Yes.
So working with people and working with organizational leaders to help define these paths has inspired you to found your own company, your own consulting business, The Data Touch. Tell us a little bit about how your experience of creating this impact and delivering meaningful results for organizations inspired this move for you.
Absolutely. There's really two things that really inspired the move. The first thing was I really wanted to try and bridge the gap between business and data. And by that, I mean really putting data in the boardroom. And the reason for this was because over the years, I've observed a lot of discontinuity between leadership teams, boardroom type people, and analytics teams that were doing analysis in the corner of the organization. And a lot of these analyses just weren't being promoted enough, or they weren't being used. And one of the key reasons for that was because of that discontinuity. And so a lot of these analyses weren't just focusing on the things that really mattered to the people in the boardroom. So one of my mission is really to bridge that gap and really making sure that the analysis that we do are completely business relevant, but also making sure that leadership teams are aware of the art of the possible with data and how data can absolutely support them day to day. And actually going back to the topic of education, I also strongly feel that leadership teams need to be trained on data, because there's a lot of misconception around what data can do, and it can help absolutely everyone in the organization.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting point. Data in its own can be so vague, and again, it just goes back to your point of just getting rid of all the ambiguity,
Yes.
having a clear path to what our objectives are, and those objectives are driven and supported by the boardroom. So I really like that push to get the data into the boardroom.
Yes.
And to translate all of that research from the poor guys and gals over in the corner, but to translate that into binary, which for the boardroom then is kind of bottom line results kind of at the end.
Absolutely.
At the end of the day.
Yes. Yeah.
What's your greatest challenge, Penelope, in getting data into the boardroom?
It's what's my biggest challenge? I think working with large organizations, because you've got, you know, many different teams, sometimes it's really hard to understand how they connect with each other, and how to make sure that, you know, they can shine, basically. And, you know, finding your way through because sometimes a lot of these organizations are very fragmented, and
Yes.
you know, we're talking about teams that don't necessarily talk with each other, that sometimes there is a bit of overlap in terms of what each team does, and some potential internal competition. So that's always the difficult bit. But I really feel that, you know, it is absolutely possible, and I have seen it worked, you know, bringing, you know, different teams together around a common data agenda by making these people part of the data game, if you like.
Yes.
And once people realize that actually, yes, I do have a role to play in this data agenda, because, you know, I have I'm an expert at whatever it might be. It could be marketing, it could be design. I am an expert at this, and therefore no one knows this as much as I do. I just need a bit of a data lens, if you like, and I'll be even more efficient. So it's really about communicating data as a service, something that can really help teams, as opposed to you've got to do it, you have no choice, because otherwise you will be left behind. Now, that can work in some instances, but that's not very sustainable. And that's not how you get long-term buy-in. So I think,
Yes.
you know, focusing on the people first and then the data is probably how we will achieve a lot more.
Yes, to engage and communicate with the people, and we find this often, and it's really a recurring theme in the podcast, and we've done, gosh, well over 100 now, we're approaching 200, and communication and engagement is a really popular and common running theme. So either we're doing it right and need to do it better, or we're not doing it at all and need to start doing it,
True.
you know, for that kind of thing. Because you're right, people are their own SMEs, and how do we knit all of that talent and all of that intelligence and all of that um, uh, property as well, the intellectual property together to make it work best for the business.
That's right.
Um, Kind of linked with that as well, a little, Penelope, would be the machine learning, and kind of, you know, it sounds very robotic, but it's not really. Tell us a little about building your own machine learning prototypes, and I know you have many, but maybe just a little how you've built them around e-commerce and data,
Sure.
and how you can use this to predict both the internal customer outcomes, like our staff and our people we were just talking about, and our external business outcomes.
Sure. Yes. Yeah. So machine learning is a field that I am passionate about, and you know, it's just fascinating. You know what you can do with it, but also the speed at which it evolves. And so I went into that field 3-4 years ago, because I thought that there was really something there. And so in terms of the prototypes that I've been building. So one is around trying to predict, as you rightly said, a customer outcome. So what are the chances for this person that is on this website at this moment in time to do a specific action? So in a typical e-commerce scenario, there will be a purchase. And that's been really interesting in itself, in terms of how do we go about that. So, you know, a lot of the challenges in machine learning is about actually getting the data in the right format, making sure that, you know, the data we've got is quality data and it can be read by algorithms. So there's a lot of non-sexy work that we don't see, and that we don't necessarily like to spend a lot of time on, but we must. Um, but the really cool part is when we actually start to select, you know, algorithms, and when they actually give us data, results at scale, but also in such a fast manner. So moving from my part, so moving from Excel to Python has been quite an adventure. I've really enjoyed it, and yeah, it's been really interesting to actually be surprised by some of the results that I was seeing. And I think it's really important for everyone, analysts included, to always remain open to the data that you are going to see at the end, because we all have, even data people have their own certainties sometimes about what matters, and this is where machine learning can really help, because we don't necessarily select the data ourselves. We send all of the data that we've got, and we let the algorithms actually identify the ones that matter more than the others. So that's been really interesting. So that first prototype around being able to predict whether a customer was going to buy or not. And the other one has been around clustering. So, and this one is also really interesting for organizations, because it can potentially identify new areas of growth for organization, in a sense that, again, organizations have an understanding of their key customer segments. Well, sometimes not all of them do. But for the ones who do, they'll have an idea about, is it mostly male, female, age, that sort of things. What really matters for these customers, they'll have an idea. But the beauty of some machine learning algorithms is that they will also find groups of customers that had not been identified before. And interpreting that data sometimes can actually be fairly complex, because we're talking about unsupervised learning. So sometimes we're not really sure how these groups have been discovered by the algorithms. But at the same time, the richness of the insight can be huge, because if you can actually identify new customer segments, then you get into, okay, so let's launch this new service, this new proposition, and that can potentially be completely informing the whole strategy. So that's fascinating as well.
Yes, it is, and it is fascinating. And the really interesting part there, just pulling out a little thread, is by nature analysts are quite black and white, we think. But that subjectivity absolutely does come into play. And part of that will be, as you mentioned, their experience. And they say, well, when this runs on XY platform, I'm going to get a B result, typically. But the anomalies and those clusters out there, that's where the objectivity of the algorithms in the machine learning comes in. And I can absolutely see the great thread there in what can be exposed in the data when we have the defined path versus trying to run through a whole big desert with the millions and gazillions of grains of sand there. There is a way out if you follow it. Yeah,
absolutely. Yes.
That's huge. We would love to talk to you again, Penelope. I think maybe a little bit more about that around the machine learning aspect and the translation of those output as well, and the artificial intelligence that we've gleaned from those. But Penelope, thank you so much for speaking with us today, and we look forward to speaking with you again.
Thank you, Kat. It was a pleasure. Thank you.